Please subscribe to my channel. This is my sincere request to you. I expected another suffocating Thanksgiving until my grandmother slammed her glass down and screamed at me about $1 million house. I froze, having never seen the place. The words I blurted out, "I have no idea about it," were not just the truth. They were a password that sent my family into a panic. In that moment, someone accidentally confessed exactly what they should have kept hidden right in front of the person who could destroy them. My name is Zoe Foster, and as I drove toward Briar Glen, Wisconsin, on the fourth Thursday of November, I felt less like a daughter returning home and more like a defendant approaching the bench. The heater in my 1998 Honda Civic had decided to die 3 days ago, right as the first real frost of the season settled over the Midwest. My breath fogged in the air before me, a rhythmic reminder that I was cold, broke, and incredibly tired. On the passenger seat, wrapped in aluminum foil that caught the gray light of the afternoon sun, sat my contribution to the Thanksgiving feast. It was a pumpkin pie, not a bakery pie with a lattice crust and a gold cardboard base. It was a homemade disaster crafted from generic canned filling that cost $99 and a pre-made crust that had cracked down the center the moment I took it out of the packaging. It was ugly. It was cheap. It was the absolute best I could do. 2 days ago, I had been called into a glass-walled office at Crescent Ridge Solutions and told that my position was being eliminated due to corporate restructuring. I was 34 years old. I had a degree that I was still paying for, a resume that looked like a patchwork quilt of short stints, and a bank account that currently held exactly $1,243. The severance package was non-existent because I was a contractor. To make matters worse, my credit score, which I had guarded like a hawk since college, had taken a mysterious and catastrophic nosedive 6 months ago. It had plummeted to the low 500s for reasons I could not decipher, effectively barring me from renting a new apartment. I was currently sleeping on a deflated air mattress in my friend's living room, living out of 2 suitcases and a lingering sense of dread. As I turned onto the street where my parents lived, the knot in my stomach tightened. The houses here were sprawling, confident structures with manicured lawns and driveways that didn't have oil stains. My parents' house was the crown jewel of the cul-de-sac. It was a 2-story colonial with white pillars and a wraparound porch that screamed stability. There were 3 cars in the driveway already: my father's pristine sedan, my mother's SUV, and the sleek, aggressive luxury convertible that belonged to my sister Sienna. I parked my rattling Civic on the street, far enough away that it wouldn't ruin the aesthetic of the driveway, but close enough that I wouldn't freeze walking to the door. I took a deep breath, grabbed the sad little pie, and walked up the path. The wreath on the door was made of dried autumn leaves and probably cost more than my weekly food budget. I didn't knock. I just walked in. The heat hit me first, smelling of sage, roasting turkey, and expensive perfume. "Zoe, you made it." My mother, Elaine, swept into the hallway. She was wearing a silk blouse the color of champagne and holding a glass of white wine. She looked perfect. She always looked perfect. She hugged me, but it was one of those air hugs where her body didn't actually touch mine, ensuring her silk remained unwrinkled and my poverty didn't rub off on her. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom," I said, holding out the foil-wrapped disc. She looked at the pie. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a tiny glitch in the matrix before she recovered. "Oh, you baked. How quaint. Thank you, sweetie. I will put this in the kitchen." She took it with 2 fingers, as if it were a dirty diaper, and whisked it away before anyone important could see it. I followed her into the living room, stripping off my coat. The gang was all here. My father, Mark, was standing by the fireplace, swirling a tumbler of scotch. He looked tired, but he was wearing his successful man mask, the one he put on for neighbors and holidays. My sister Sienna was draped over the leather sofa like a cat that had just eaten a canary. She was wearing a cashmere sweater that looked soft enough to sleep in and diamond stud earrings that caught the light every time she moved her head. Next to her was her husband, Derek, a man whose personality was entirely composed of golf anecdotes and investment advice. But the room felt different today, heavier. In the high-backed armchair in the corner sat my grandmother, Evelyn. We hadn't seen her in 3 years. She had been living in Florida, and communication had been sparse. Dad always said she was difficult, that she preferred to be left alone. Yet here she was. She looked smaller than I remembered, her white hair pulled back in a severe bun, her hands resting on the head of a cane, but her eyes were the same. Sharp blue, terrifying. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't participating in the small talk. She was just watching. "Hi, Grandma," I said, walking over. I felt like a child again, terrified of scuffing the floor. She looked up at me. Her gaze read over my thrift store sweater and my scuffed boots. It wasn't judgmental exactly. It was analytical. "Zoe," she said. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping together. "You look like you haven't slept in a decade." "Just busy, Grandma." I lied. "Work is crazy." She hummed, a sound that indicated she didn't believe a word of it. "Okay, everyone." Mom clapped her hands, entering the room with a frantic energy that set my teeth on edge. "Dinner is ready. Let's move to the table before everything gets cold." The dining room was a masterpiece of tablescaping. There were candles, heavy linen napkins, and enough silverware to perform a surgery. I took my assigned seat. It was the same seat I had sat in since I was 10 years old, on the left side, facing the window, the drafty spot. Sienna sat opposite me, glowing with health and wealth. Derek sat next to her. Grandma Evelyn was at the far end, and Dad took the head of the table. The performance began. We passed dishes. We complimented the turkey. We talked about the weather. It was the standard American family theater where we pretended everything was fine while secretly resenting each other. But the air was thick with tension. I noticed things, small things. My mother had her phone on the table face down. Every few minutes it would vibrate against the wood. A low buzz every time it did. Her shoulders jumped up toward her ears. She would glance at it, then glance at Dad, then look away. My father wasn't eating. He was drinking his scotch and cutting his turkey into tiny microscopic pieces. His eyes kept darting toward the hallway, toward the front door. He looked like he was waiting for the police or a hitman or both. And Grandma Evelyn just sat there. She took small bites. She drank water, but her head moved constantly, tracking the conversations, tracking the eye contact. She was a predator in a room full of grazers. I tried to keep my head down and eat. The food was delicious, a stark contrast to the instant noodles I'd been living on for the past month. I wanted to pack some in my pockets, but restrained myself. "So," Sienna said, her voice piercing the low murmur of chewing. She laid a hand on Derek's arm. "We have some news." Dad looked up, relieved for a distraction. "Oh, what is it, honey?" "Another promotion." Sienna laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Better. We finally closed on the contractors for the renovations. We are redoing the entire deck at the lake house. We are going to extend it right out over the water and put in a glass railing." My father dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against his plate. "That's ambitious, Sienna." "Well, the house deserves it," Sienna said, beaming. She looked around the table, desperate for admiration. "It is such a beautiful property. Derek and I were up there last weekend, the autumn leaves reflecting on the water magic. We are thinking of buying a boat next summer, a pontoon, maybe something for parties." I felt the familiar burn of shame and jealousy in my chest. Sienna was 2 years older than me. She had never struggled a day in her life. Dad had paid for her college. Dad had helped with her down payment on her main house. And now she had a vacation home near a lake. Meanwhile, I was calculating if I could afford gas to get back to the city. "That sounds expensive," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Sienna looked at me with a pitying smile. "It is an investment, Zoe. Real estate always appreciates. You have to spend money to make money. But I guess that is a concept you struggle with, Sienna." Mom warned, but there was no heat in it. "Be nice." "I am being nice," Sienna said, shrugging. "I am just saying. Zoe is always so worried about pennies. If she focused on the big picture, maybe she wouldn't be well where she is." "Where I am?" I asked, my grip on my fork tightening. "And where is that, Sienna?" "You mean employed, hardworking." "I mean unstable," Sienna said lightly. "You know, drifting." "I am not drifting," I snapped. "I am surviving." "There is a difference." Okay, let's not do this, Dad said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Zoe, don't be so sensitive. Sienna is just proud of her success. You could learn something from her drive. The injustice of it felt like a physical blow. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them about the late nights, the double shifts, the constant rejections, the baffling financial hurdles that seemed to pop up out of nowhere every time I got a foothold. I wanted to tell them I was drowning, but I didn't. I just looked down at my plate. I was the failure. That was the role written for me in this play. Grandma Evelyn was watching this exchange. She hadn't blinked. Her gaze was fixed on Sienna. Then it shifted to my father, then to my mother. It was like she was assembling a puzzle in her mind. The main course was cleared. Mom brought out the desserts. There was the gourmet pecan tart she had bought. There was a chocolate silk pie. And there, shoved to the side, was my sad little pumpkin pie. Who wants coffee? Mom asked, her voice too bright. I will take some, Derek said. Me too, Sienna said. She leaned back in her chair, looking satisfied. You know, Grandma, you should come up to the lake house when the renovations are done. It is really peaceful. We call it our little sanctuary. A sanctuary? Grandma Evelyn repeated. It was the first word she had spoken in 20 minutes. Yes, Sienna said. It is just ours. You know. I reached for the serving spoon to take a slice of my own pie, mostly out of defiance. My hand was trembling slightly. The tension in the room was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders. I felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. Then it happened. Grandma Evelyn lifted her heavy crystal water glass. She held it for a second, the light refracting through the water. Then she slammed it down onto the table. Then the sound was explosive. Water geezed up and splashed onto the table runner. The heavy crystal thudded against the wood with a violence that made the plates jump. The room went instantly dead silent. My mother froze with the coffee pot in midair. Derek stopped chewing. Sienna's smile vanished. Dad looked like he had been slapped. We all stared at Grandma. She was trembling, not with age, but with a cold, focused fury. She slowly turned her head. Her eyes bypassed my father. They bypassed my mother. They bypassed Sienna. They locked directly onto me. Her expression was unrecognizable. It was a mix of heartbreak and a rage so profound it felt dangerous. She leaned forward, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. The silence stretched tight as a piano wire until it was unbearable. Then she opened her mouth and screamed, her voice cracking with the force of it. Why is there an elderly couple living in the lake house that I bought for you? The echo of my grandmother's voice seemed to bounce off the crown molding and rattle the expensive china in the cabinet. The question hung there, suspended in the sage-scented air like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. Why is there an elderly couple living in the lake house that I bought for you? My brain could not process the syntax of the sentence. It was as if she had started speaking a language I had never heard before. Lake house bought for me. These words were incompatible with my reality. My reality was checking the price of eggs 3 times before putting them in the cart. My reality was sleeping on a deflated air mattress that slowly lowered me to the hard floor by 3 in the morning. My reality was a bank notification telling me I had insufficient funds for a Netflix subscription. I stared at her. My heart was not just beating. It was thrashing against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving my skin cold and clammy. I looked at my hands, which were gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles had turned the color of bone. Grandma, I started, but my voice failed me. It was a dry rasp. I swallowed and tried again. I do not know what you are talking about. Evelyn did not blink. Her blue eyes were lasers, cutting through the layers of my family's pretense. Do not lie to me, Zoe. I bought that property 3 years ago. I put the deed in your name. I sent the documents to your parents' house because you were in between apartments. I have the transfer receipt. I shook my head. The movement was jerky, mechanical. No, I said, Grandma, I swear. I have never seen a deed. I have never seen a house. I have no idea about it. The sentence tumbled out of my mouth, raw and terrified. I have no idea about it. It felt like a confession of ignorance, a plea for sanity. Before the last word had even settled, the vacuum of silence was filled by a rush of noise from the other side of the table. It was Sienna. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" Sienna scoffed. She let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like glass breaking. She reached across the table and patted Grandma's hand, her manicured nails clicking against the table. "Grandma, you are clearly exhausted. The flight from Florida is long, and you know how you get when you are jet-lagged. You get confused about dates and details." "I am not confused," Grandma snapped, pulling her hand away as if Sienna's touch burned. "You are mixing things up," Sienna insisted, her voice taking on that condescending sing-song tone she used when talking to customer service workers. She intended to get fired. "You probably mean the house you looked at years ago. Or maybe you are thinking of that time Dad talked about buying a rental property. You are tired. You need to rest." "Sienna is right," my mother Elaine chimed in. Her voice was high and brittle like a violin string stretched to the breaking point. She stood up halfway, hovering over her chair, desperate to physically block the conversation. "Mother, really? This is Thanksgiving. We are supposed to be grateful, not interrogating people about imaginary real estate. Look at the time. Who wants more coffee? I have decaf. I can make a fresh pot of decaf." "Sit down, Elaine." Grandma said she didn't shout it. She didn't have to. The command was absolute. Mom sat down. My father, Mark, cleared his throat. It was a low rumbling sound. He turned his body toward Grandma, shielding me from her view, but his words were a weapon aimed directly at my chest. "Mom," he said, his voice dropping to a confidential, serious register, "you have to understand. Zoe has been under a lot of pressure lately. She lost her job again. She is struggling." He gestured vaguely toward me as if I were a broken appliance that couldn't be fixed. "She creates these narratives to cope. If you start talking about houses and money, you are just going to confuse her more. She is fragile right now. We try not to agitate her." Agitate her. The phrase hit me with the force of a physical slap. The air left my lungs. I remembered 2 years ago, when I had asked to see the details of my student loan trust that my grandfather had set up before he died. Dad had told me I was being paranoid, that I was obsessing over money, that I was being manic. He had used that word manic. He told me to calm down, to stop acting crazy, or he would stop helping me entirely. I remembered 6 months ago, when I asked why my credit score had dropped 50 points overnight, when I hadn't missed a payment. Mom had told me I was imagining things, that I was just stressed, that I was unstable, agitated, fragile. They were keywords. They were the bars of the cage they had built around me. Every time I got close to a truth, they diagnosed me with a floor. They turned my valid questions into symptoms of a mental failing. And for years I had believed them. I had thought, maybe I am crazy. Maybe I am bad with money. Maybe I just do not understand how the world works. But looking at my father now, watching the sweat bead on his upper lip, watching his eyes dart toward the hallway again, I felt a crack form in that belief. "I am not agitated," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was steady. "And I am not imagining a house, Dad. Grandma is the one who brought it up." "See," Dad said, throwing his hands up. He looked at Grandma with a pleading expression. "She is getting defensive. This is what I mean. She cannot handle stress. Let's just drop it. One, please." "For Zoe's sake." "For Zoe's sake," Grandma repeated. She tasted the words, chewed on them, and spat them out. She reached into her purse, which she had kept on the floor beside her chair. She pulled out a smartphone. It wasn't an old flip phone. It was the newest model, a large, sleek device that looked incongruous in her weathered hands. "I am old, Mark," Grandma said, tapping the screen with a deliberate, practiced finger. "I am not senile, and unlike you, I know how to use the cloud." She swiped once, twice, then she turned the phone around and placed it in the center of the table, propped up against the salt shaker so everyone could see. "Explain this," she commanded. I leaned forward. The screen was bright, the resolution crisp. It was a photo. In the background stood a house. It was beautiful, a modern A-frame with floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting a steel gray lake and trees blazing with autumn colors. It looked like something out of a magazine, the kind of place where people drank wine and wore cashmere and never worried about the price of heating oil. In the foreground stood four people. On the left were Sienna and Derek. They were dressed in matching beige trench coats. Sienna was laughing, her head thrown back, a glass of champagne in her hand. Derek was smiling, that shark-like smile of his, one arm draped possessively over Sienna's shoulder. On the right was an older couple I did not recognize. They looked kind. They looked wealthy. They were holding a hand-painted wooden sign that read, "Welcome home," and in the caption below the photo, which was clearly a screenshot from a social media post, were the words, "So happy to welcome our first long-term tenants to the Lake Rowan retreat. Wishing you a peaceful stay. Landlord Life Passive Income Lake." The date on the post was 14 months ago. I stared at the image. I stared at the hashtag landlord life. Sienna, my sister who had just told me I needed to understand the big picture. My sister who had mocked my pie. She was standing in front of a house my grandmother claimed was mine, renting it out to strangers. I looked up at Sienna for a single heartbeat. The mask slipped. Sienna was not looking at the phone. She was looking at Derek. Her face had gone the color of ash. Her mouth was slightly open and her eyes were wide with a raw primal panic. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was the look of someone who hears the police sirens and realizes there is no back exit. Then she blinked and the mask slammed back into place. She grabbed her napkin and dabbed at her mouth, though she hadn't eaten in 10 minutes. "That is just," Sienna started, her voice shaking before she cleared her throat violently. "That is just a rental we managed for a friend helping them out. You know Derek is in real estate. We help people for a friend," Grandma repeated. Her voice dropped an octave. It was cold enough to freeze the water in the glasses. "I visited that house yesterday. Sienna." I knocked on the door. "That nice couple, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, invited me in for tea. They told me they have been paying rent for 3 years. They told me they send the checks to a company called Blue Heron Holdings." Grandma turned her gaze back to me. It was no longer angry. It was filled with a terrible, piercing pity that hurt worse than the anger. "They told me," Grandma continued, "that they rent the house from the owner, a woman named Sienna." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It pressed against my eardrums. My father was staring at his scotch. My mother was staring at the tablecloth, tracing the pattern with a trembling finger. Sienna was staring at the wall, her jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping in her cheek. Grandma leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine, demanding that I finally see the truth. "The deed was in your name, Zoe," she said. "I saw the original papers. I paid the lawyers. So tell me." She paused, and the weight of the coming questions seemed to darken the room. "Who used Zoe's name to transfer that house?" The question my grandmother asked hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, but my mind was no longer in the dining room. It was spiraling backward, rewinding through the last 3 years of my life. It was tearing through the timeline of my failures, looking for the glitch. For years, I had believed that I was simply the victim of terrible luck. I believed I was a statistical anomaly, a person destined to struggle no matter how hard I swam against the current. But as I stared at that photograph of Sienna standing in front of the house I supposedly owned, the pieces of my shattered life began to rearrange themselves into a terrifyingly clear picture. I flashed back to the week after my graduation. I had finished magna cum laude. I had a portfolio that professors had praised. I was hungry, ambitious, and ready to work. I had lined up 5 interviews with top-tier firms in Chicago and Milwaukee. I remembered walking into those glass buildings, feeling the thrill of possibility. The interviews had gone perfectly. I saw the hiring managers nod. I saw them smile. I heard the phrases that usually mean an offer is coming. "We are very impressed. You are exactly what we are looking for." And then nothing. One by one, the rejection emails came. They were cold, generic, and confusing. 2 of them were rescinded offers. When I asked for feedback, a sympathetic HR manager at a marketing firm had told me off the record that there was a flag on my background check. She would not say what it was, only that I was considered a liability. I had gone to my parents, then crying at the kitchen table. This very table I asked for help. I asked if they knew what could be wrong. I remembered my father, Mark, standing over me shaking his head with a look of disappointed resignation. Zoe, he had said, his voice heavy with paternal lecture, this is just the real world. You cannot expect things to be handed to you. You need to be independent. Do not look for excuses. Look at yourself. Look at yourself. So I did. I internalized it. I took the temp jobs. I took the waitressing shifts. I worked 60 hours a week and barely scraped by. And while I was scrubbing tables and formatting spreadsheets for minimum wage, I watched Sienna. I watched Sienna quit her job because her boss had bad vibes. 2 weeks later, she was driving a new car. I asked how. Dad said Sienna needs a little help getting back on her feet. She is sensitive. We do not want her to lose momentum. The double standard had always stung, but I had accepted it as the family dynamic. Sienna was the fragile princess. I was the workhorse. But now the memory tasted like bile. The spiral went deeper. I thought about the apartment I tried to rent 18 months ago. It was a small studio, barely big enough for a bed, but it was mine. I had saved the deposit for 6 months. I filled out the application with pride. The leasing agent had called me the next day. I could still hear her voice, dry and judgmental. Ms. Foster, we cannot approve your application. Your credit score is in the low 500s, and there are delinquencies on your file. I had nearly dropped the phone. Delinquencies. I paid every bill on time. I ate ramen so I could pay my bills on time. I checked my credit report, and it was a disaster zone. There were inquiries I never made. There were credit cards opened in my name that were maxed out and defaulted on. When I called the credit bureaus to dispute them, they asked security questions I could not answer. They asked about addresses. I had never lived at addresses in Florida, addresses near a lake. I had called my mother, Elaine, in a panic. I told her someone had stolen my identity. Oh, Zoe, she had sighed, sounding exhausted by my drama. You probably just forgot to pay something. You are always so scattered. Stop trying to blame hackers for your own irresponsibility. Fix it yourself. We cannot bail you out every time you make a mistake. I hung up, feeling crazy. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Was I irresponsible? Did I open cards and forget I started keeping receipts for cups of coffee? I started documenting every penny. Then there were the student loans. My grandfather had left a small trust specifically for education. It was supposed to cover my payments, but every month I got letters saying my payment was late. Every month I got hit with late fees. When I called the loan Surah, they said the automatic transfer had been rejected or that the account number had been changed. I was drowning, and the whole time my family stood on the shore and told me I just needed to swim harder. My eyes drifted to Grandma Evelyn. I remembered the mail. It was a small memory, one I had dismissed at the time about a year ago. I had stopped by this house to pick up some winter clothes I had stored in the attic. I saw a stack of mail on the hallway console table. On top was a thick envelope made of heavy cream-colored paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Grandma's jagged, elegant script. It was addressed to Zoe Foster. I had reached for it, my heart leaping. I hadn't heard from her in ages, but my mother's hand had snatched it away before I could touch it. That is nothing, Elaine had said, sliding it into a drawer. Just junk mail, advertisements for hearing aids. They sell mailing lists, you know. But it had Grandma's handwriting. I had argued. You are seeing things. Zoe, she had snapped. Grandma is in assisted living. She can barely hold a pen, let alone write letters. Don't be morbid. I had asked Dad for her number. I asked for her address in Florida so I could visit. No, Mark had said, his face closing off like a steel trap. She has dementia, Zoe. She gets very confused and aggressive. If you call her, it just upsets her. The doctor said no contact. We are doing this to protect her and to protect you. Protect me. They were protecting me from the truth. They were protecting me from the fact that I was the owner of $1 million asset. I looked down at the phone on the table again, the photo of Sienna. I remembered the day she posted that. It was mid-July. It was 95 in the city. My car had broken down, and I had to choose between paying for the tow truck or buying groceries for the week. I chose the tow truck because I needed to get to a job interview that I inevitably didn't get. I spent 3 days eating plain rice and drinking tap water. I was sweating in my non-air-conditioned room, feeling like a failure, feeling like dirt, and I had opened Instagram to distract myself. There was Sienna. She was on a dock. The sun was setting, painting the sky in purples and oranges. She was holding a glass of rosé. She looked golden. She looked free. The caption on the photo Grandma had shown us was blocked by the cropping. I remembered it. I remembered it perfectly because I had cried when I read it. My vacation home. She had written that, not our vacation home, not the family rental, my vacation home. And there was something else, a small detail that had nagged at me, but I had never connected until this second. Sienna always knew when Grandma was not coming back every holiday for the past 3 years. When I asked if Grandma would be there, Sienna would answer with total confidence, "No, the old lady won't be back for a long time. She is stuck down there. She is too sick to travel." She said it with a smirk. She said it with the confidence of someone who had seen the schedule, or someone who was ensuring the schedule stayed empty. I looked at the timestamps on the bank statements Grandma had slapped onto the table. The monthly rent payments from the Hendersons. $2,500 a month. That was 3 years of payments. That was $90,000. $90,000. That money could have paid off my student loans. It could have fixed my car. It could have gotten me an apartment where the heat worked. It could have allowed me to buy a pie from a bakery instead of making a pathetic one out of 99-cent sludge. It wasn't just that they stole the house. They stole my stability. They stole my credit. They stole my career opportunities by flagging my background checks with bad debt. They watched me starve. They watched me cry. They watched me beg for help. And they lectured me about responsibility while they spent my money on renovations and boats. They didn't just steal an asset. They stole 3 years of my life. A cold, hard clarity washed over me. It replaced the fear. It replaced the confusion. The shaking in my hands stopped. If that house was legally mine, and if the red checks were legally mine, then my poverty was not a result of my incompetence. It was a result of their greed. I wasn't a failure. I was a victim of a very long, very expensive con. I looked up from the table. The silence was still holding, but it was fragile. Sienna was pale. Lark was sweating. Elaine was frozen. I looked at the photo one last time. "Welcome home." I whispered the question inside my own skull, and the answer made my blood run cold. If that house is mine, why am I living like a homeless person? Because my family decided I was worth more to them as a tax write-off and a ghost than as a daughter. And now I knew Lake Rowan Retreat. Grandma Evelyn said, pronouncing the name with a deliberate surgical precision that made it sound less like a vacation home and more like an indictment. She kept her hand resting on the phone, anchoring the evidence to the table. "That is the name of the property. I purchased it 3 years ago, paid in full cash. It was not an investment for the family portfolio, and it certainly was not a toy for Sienna. It was a trust asset. It was a safety net meant for the future of Zoe. The name of the house meant nothing to me. Lake Rowan Retreat. It sounded like a place where people wore white linen and drank iced tea. A place that existed in a completely different universe from my cramped, drafty life. "I have never heard that name before," I said. My voice was steady now, hardened by the sudden freezing clarity of the situation. "I have never signed a deed. I have never received a set of keys. I do not even know the street address if I'd own a house. Grandma, I am hearing about it for the very first time right now, over a half-eaten turkey." The denial hung in the air, absolute and irrefutable. Legally, you cannot own property without knowing it unless someone else has become you. My father Mark let out a long, heavy sigh. It was a sound he had perfected over the years, a performance of the weary patriarch carrying the burden of a difficult child. He placed his silverware down, lining it up perfectly with the edge of the placemat, buying himself time to construct the narrative. "Mom," he began, his voice dropping to that reasonable, soothing baritone he used when he wanted to shut down an argument before it started. He looked at Grandma with a mix of patience and pity. "We did not want to burden you with the details at the time. You were dealing with your hip surgery, and things here were complicated. Zoe was going through a very dark period 3 years ago. I felt the muscles in my neck tighten. I knew exactly where this was going. What period? I asked, cutting him off. Mark ignored me. He kept his eyes fixed on his mother. Zoe was unstable. Mom, you remember, she had just graduated. She could not hold down a job. She was calling us at all hours crying about money. She was manic. If we had handed over a deed to a valuable property to her, then she would have sold it for pennies within a week just to fund some impulsive idea, or worse, she would have let it fall into ruin. He turned to me then, his expression softening into a mask of concern that made my stomach turn. We were protecting you, honey. We put the asset under management to keep it safe until you were ready, until you were better. I stood up. The chair scraped loud and harsh against the hardwood floor. I was not sick. Dad, I was poor. There is a difference. You're shouting, Elaine whispered, her eyes darting to the windows as if the neighbors were pressing their ears against the glass. I am not shouting, I said, my voice rising despite myself. I was crying about money because I was hungry. I was losing jobs because my background check was flagged. I was unstable because I was living on 4 hours of sleep and working 2 jobs to pay off loans that you guys told me were being handled. You call that a dark period. I call it survival. Elaine let out a sharp gasp and brought a hand to her chest. Her eyes welled up with instant practice tears. See, she said, looking at Grandma. Look at her. Mother, look at this aggression. She is doing it right now. She cannot control her emotions. This is exactly why we could not trust her with the responsibility of a house. She snaps. She is hysterical. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. By reacting to their theft, I was proving I was too volatile to be a victim. It was a trap I had walked into 1,000 times before. But this time, Grandma Evelyn was not looking at me with disappointment. She was looking at Mark and Elaine with the cold detachment of a judge watching a guilty defendant perjure themselves. Sit down, Zoe, Grandma said softly. It wasn't a reprimand. It was an invitation to watch the slaughter. I sat. So Grandma said, turning her gaze to Mark, you claim you were managing the property, holding it in trust because Zoe was mentally unfit. Exactly, Mark said, exhaling as if the crisis had passed. It was a stewardship. We were going to transfer it to her once she showed some stability, once she got a steady career. I see, Grandma said. She reached into her large leather tote bag again. That is a very noble explanation, Mark. However, it contradicts the conversation I had yesterday afternoon. She pulled out a manila envelope. It was thick. She undid the string closure with agonizing slowness, letting the sound of the paper amplify the tension in the room. I drove to the house, she said. Lake Rowan. It is a lovely drive. I knocked on the door and a lovely woman named Mrs. Anderson answered. We had tea. I asked her about the ownership of the house. Sienna shifted in her seat. The fabric of her expensive dress rustled. She picked up her wine glass, but her hand was shaking so badly she had to set it back down before she spilled it. Mrs. Henderson was very confused when I mentioned Zoe. Grandma continued, her eyes sliding over to Sienna. She told me she has never heard the name Zoe. She told me that for the last 3 years she and her husband have been renting the property from the owner, a young successful businesswoman who comes up to check on the renovations personally. Grandma paused, letting the silence stretch until it was thin and screaming. She told me her landlord is Sienna. That is a misunderstanding, Sienna blurted out. Her voice was shrill. They are old. They get names mixed up. I just handled the maintenance requests for Dad. I was the contact point. That is all. Is that so? Grandma asked. She reached into the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. She fanned them out on the table like a winning poker hand. They were photocopies of checks, personal checks from the Hendersons. Mrs. Henderson is a meticulous record keeper, Grandma said. She was kind enough to print out copies of her bank drafts for me. Look at the memo line. I leaned forward. The handwriting on the checks was looped and shaky but legible. Rent Lake Rowan October. Rent Lake Rowan November. Rent Lake Rowan December. Each check was made out for $2,500. And look who they are made out to. Grandma said, tapping a finger on the pay line. It didn't say Mark Foster. It didn't say Zoe Foster. It said Blue Heron Holdings, LLC. I looked up Blue Heron Holdings this morning, Grandma said, her voice dry as dust. It is a shell company registered 3 years ago. The registered agent is not Mark. It is not Elaine. She looked at Sienna. It is Sienna Foster. They are just checks. Sienna cried, her face flushing a deep, ugly red. Derek, say something. Tell her. Derek, who had been trying to blend into the wallpaper, jumped. He looked from his wife to the checks, panic flickering in his eyes. He was a man who liked easy money, not hard questions. Derek stammered. Well, the Hendersons, they are actually friends of mine from the club. They needed a place to stay while their condo was being fumigated. It was just a favor, a temporary arrangement. A favor? Grandma asked, raising an eyebrow. A temporary arrangement that has lasted 3 years with a lease agreement. I saw the lease. Derek, it is 20 pages long. It lists the monthly rent, the security deposit, and the pet fees. Do you charge your friends pet fees for a favor? Derek shut his mouth. He looked at Sienna, and for the first time, I saw a crack in their united front. He looked at her like she had promised him this would never happen. We were going to give the money to Zoe, Elaine interjected, trying to pivot the lie. We were saving it for her. Put it in a savings account so when she finally got her act together, she would have a nest egg. We didn't spend it. Then Grandma asked, pulling another sheet of paper from the envelope. Did the background check I ran on Blue Heron Holdings show massive withdrawals every month? Withdrawals that match the exact amounts of the credit card bills for Sienna's wedding last year. Withdrawals that match the down payment on Mark's new sedan. The room went deadly silent. The air was sucked out of the space. There was no protective parent defense for that. There was no Sienna is just helping excuse for that. It was theft, plain and simple. Mark looked pale. He loosened his tie, his hands trembling. He looked at me, and I saw something new in his eyes. Fear not for me, but of me. Zoe, he said, his voice cracking. You have to understand the business. The market has been tough. We borrowed it. We were going to pay it back with interest. You stole a house, I said, my voice barely a whisper. You stole my house, and you let me believe I was a failure because I couldn't afford rent on a studio apartment. It is not like that. Sienna hissed. You weren't using it. You didn't even know it existed. What were we supposed to do? Let it sit empty while you played the starving artist. I was not playing. I slammed my hand on the table. I was starving. Enough, Grandma said. The single word cut through the noise like a blade. She gathered the papers back into a neat stack. She looked at me, her expression softening, the rage in her eyes replaced by a deep, sorrowful regret. There is one more thing, Zoe, she said quietly. Something I need you to answer, and I need the truth. But, I asked. I felt exhausted, battered by the revelations. For 3 years, Grandma said, I wrote to you every month. I sent letters to this house asking you how you liked the property, asking if you needed money for repairs, asking why you never called me. I sent birthday cards with checks inside. I sent Christmas cards asking if you were angry with me. She leaned forward, her eyes searching mine. Why did you never write back? I felt a cold chill run down my spine, freezing me to the chair. I thought about the mailbox. I thought about how whenever I visited, the mail was always already sorted. I thought about how Mom always met the mailman at the door. I thought about the time I saw that one cream-colored envelope, the one Mom had snatched away claiming it was junk mail. It wasn't junk mail. I never got them, I whispered. My throat felt tight, constricted by a sudden, overwhelming grief. It wasn't just the money. They hadn't just stolen the rent. They had stolen my grandmother. They had stolen the only person in this family who actually gave a damn about me. I never saw a single letter, I said, tears finally spilling over. Mom always said you were sick. She said you had dementia. She said you wouldn't remember me if I called. She said the doctors told us not to disturb you. Grandma's face went white. She looked at Elaine. If looks could kill, my mother would have been ash on the floor. Dementia, Grandma repeated. Her voice was a low growl. You told her I had dementia. Elaine shrank back in her chair. She looked small, petty, and terrified. We didn't want her to worry you with her problems. Mother, we were trying to keep the peace. You intercepted my mail. Grandma said, that is a federal crime, Elaine. It was family business, Mark shouted, slamming his fist on the table, trying to regain control of a ship that had already sunk. We are a family. We handle things internally, Zoe. Stop looking at us like that. We raised you. We put clothes on your back. We have a right to manage the family assets. It wasn't a family asset, I said, standing up again. I felt a strange calm settling over me. The confusion was gone. The mystery was solved. There were no more questions, only facts. It was mine, and you didn't manage it. You parasitized it. I looked at the stack of checks. I looked at the photo of the house. I looked at the people who had raised me, and I realized I was looking at strangers. Who else knows? I asked Grandma. Who else knows about this? Grandma smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. I think, she said, glancing toward the closed doors of the dining room, it is time we found out exactly how deep this rot goes. She turned her head toward the hallway. Come in, mister. Roar, she called out. I believe we have established probable cause. Enough. My father's hand came down on the mahogany table with a violence that made the silverware jump and the wine glasses shiver. The sound was like a gunshot in the enclosed space of the dining room. Mark Foster was on his feet. His face flushed a dark, dangerous red that clashed with his crisp white collar. He was no longer the weary, misunderstood patriarch. He was a cornered animal, and he was baring his teeth. This has gone too far, he shouted, his voice booming off the walls. Zoe is making a scene. She is ruining Thanksgiving. Look at her. She is shaking. She is hysterical. Everyone can see. She is unstable right now. The accusation hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Unstable. It was their favorite weapon. The label they slapped on me whenever I asked a question they did not want to answer. It was the word that had kept me docile for years, making me doubt my own sanity. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, hot and stinging. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to curl into a ball and disappear, but I didn't. I dug my fingernails into my palms until the pain grounded me. I took a breath that shuddered in my lungs, but when I spoke, my voice was low and surprisingly steady. I am not unstable, Dad, I said, locking eyes with him. And I am not making a scene. I am asking a question about a house that has my name on the deed. I just need the truth. The truth. Mark scoffed, wiping sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. The truth is you are ungrateful. We invite you into our home. We feed you and you attack your sister and your mother with these delusions. They are not delusions if there are cashed checks. Mark, Grandma Evelyn said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through his bluster like a razor through silk. We can explain the checks, Elaine interjected. She stood up, smoothing her skirt with frantic, jerky movements. Her smile was pasted on tight and terrified. But not now, not tonight. Everyone is emotional. The turkey is getting cold. Let's pause. She turned to me, her eyes pleading but her tone commanding. Zoe, honey, we will talk about this tomorrow. Just you, me, and Daddy in the study. We will go over all the paperwork. We will clear everything up. Okay, just not now. It was the classic Elaine maneuver. Delay, deflect, and then manipulate behind closed doors. If I agreed to talk tomorrow, by the time I walked into that study, they would have a story concocted. They would have documents shredded. They would have a guilt trip prepared that would make me apologize for them stealing from me. I opened my mouth to refuse, but Grandma Evelyn beat me to it. No, she said. The single syllable hung in the air, absolute and final. We are not doing this tomorrow, Grandma continued, her gaze shifting from Elaine to Mark to Sienna. And we are not doing it in the study. We are doing it right here, right now, over the dinner you paid for with my granddaughter's money. Mom, be reasonable. Mark hissed. We cannot discuss family finances with this tension. Oh, we are not just discussing finances, Grandma said. She turned her chair slightly, facing the double doors that led to the hallway. And we are certainly not doing it alone. She raised her voice, clear and commanding. Mister, "Roar, you may come in now." The room went deadly silent. The double doors, which had been closed to keep the draught out, swung open. 3 people walked into the dining room. They did not look like dinner guests. They looked like an execution squad dressed in business casual. Leading the pack was a man I recognized vaguely from Grandma's old stories, but had never met, Caleb Raw. He was tall with silver hair and a suit that cost more than my entire student loan debt. He carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy. There was no warmth in his face, only a professional predatory focus. Behind him was a woman with sharp glasses and hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She was holding a laptop and a stack of files. She scanned the room, her eyes lingering on the expensive crystal and the artwork, calculating their value. Bringing up the rear was a man who made the air in the room feel colder just by stepping into it. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a nondescript gray jacket. He didn't have a briefcase. He didn't have a laptop. He had the watchful, still demeanor of someone who used to carry a badge and now got paid a lot of money to find things people wanted hidden. "What is this?" Mark whispered. He fell back into his chair, his legs seemingly giving out beneath him. "Mom, who are these people?" "This is Caleb Raw, my attorney," Grandma said calmly. "This is Roser Delgado, a forensic accountant. And this is Gavin Pike, a private investigator." Sienna let out a choked sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "A private investigator? Grandma, are you serious? You brought lawyers to Thanksgiving dinner." "This is not a dinner, Sienna," Grandma said, picking up her wine glass and taking a slow sip. "This is a deposition." Mark looked like he was having a heart attack. "You cannot do this. This is my house. I did not invite them." "Actually," Caleb Ross spoke up. His voice was smooth, deep, and devoid of any holiday cheer. "We are not here as guests, Mr. Foster. We are here as legal counsel for Mrs. Evelyn Foster and Ms. Zoe Foster regarding the misappropriation of trust assets and potential fraud. And since the assets in question, specifically the funds from the Lake Rowan property, have been traced to accounts linked to this address, we felt it was prudent to conduct this conversation in person." "Fraud," Elaine squeaked. She grabbed Mark's arm. "Mark, do something." But Mark could do nothing. He was staring at the forensic accountant, Roser, who had already set her laptop down on the sideboard, moving a tray of candied yams to make room for her investigation. Gavin Pike, the investigator, stepped forward. He didn't look at Mark. He didn't look at Sienna. He walked straight around the table until he was standing next to me. I looked up at him. He had a scar above his left eyebrow and eyes that had seen too much. "M. Foster," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel in a mixer. "Zoe," I whispered. I was trembling. The reality of what was happening was crashing down on me. My grandmother hadn't just come to yell. She had come to war. "Zoe," Gavin corrected himself. He reached into his jacket pocket. "I was hired by your grandmother 3 weeks ago to track the communication breakdown between the two of you." He pulled out a thick padded envelope. It was sealed with red tape. "We traced the mail," Gavin said, looking across the table at my father. "We interviewed the local postmaster. We found that a hold and redirect order had been placed on your grandmother's mail coming to this address. But, more importantly, we recovered these." He placed the envelope on the table in front of me. He pulled a small knife from his pocket, slit the tape, and slid the contents out. It was a stack of letters, dozens of them. Some were in envelopes that had been torn open and resealed with clear tape. Some were still sealed. All of them were addressed to me. All of them were in Grandma's handwriting. "These were intercepted," Gavin said. "Most were never even delivered to you. They were taken directly from the mailbox by a member of this household and stored in a locked filing cabinet in the garage. We retrieved them this morning while you were all having appetizers." My breath hitched. I reached out and touched the top letter. The date on the postmark was 2 months after I graduated. "My dearest Zoe," it read. I looked at the stack. There were letters from when I lost my first job, letters from my birthday, letters from Christmas. 3 years of my grandmother trying to reach me. 3 years of her love sitting in a dark cabinet in the garage while I cried myself to sleep thinking I was all alone in the world. "You kept them," I clear's throat whispered. looking at my mother. You didn't just throw them away. You kept them. Elaine looked away, unable to meet my eyes. I was going to give them to you eventually. When you were stable enough to handle her, I choked out. She was writing to say she loved me. How does that require stability? We didn't know what was in them, Mark shouted, desperate to defend the indefensible. We thought she was filling your head with nonsense about the money. We were trying to keep you focused on work. You were trying to keep me ignorant. I yelled back, the dam finally breaking. You stole her words. You stole my relationship with her. Gavin Pike placed a heavy hand on the back of my chair. It was a gesture of protection. There is more, Gavin said. He pulled a single crisp sheet of paper from the envelope. This is not a letter. This is a copy of a document sent to the tenant, Mr. Henderson, regarding a rent increase last year. He placed it next to the letters. It is signed by the landlord, Gavin said. I looked at the signature. It wasn't Sienna's name this time. It was Zoe Foster, but it wasn't my signature. The loops were too big. The Z was slanted the wrong way. It was a forgery. A clumsy, arrogant forgery made by someone who never thought I would see it. Who signed this? I asked, looking at the table. Sienna was staring at her plate, her face pale as a sheet. Mark was drinking his scotch like it was water. That is a felony, Calabross said from the doorway. Forging a signature on a legal contract, mail fraud, wire fraud, identity theft. We are looking at a federal indictment. Mr. Foster, unless we get some clarity right now. Sienna started, then stopped. She looked at Derek. Derek was inching his chair away from her. I didn't know it was a forgery, Derek said quickly, throwing his wife under the bus with breathtaking speed. Sienna told me Zoe gave her power of attorney. She told me Zoe wanted us to handle it. You liar, Sienna shrieked. You watched me sign it. You held the paper. I did no such thing. Derek shouted back. Silent. Grandma Evelyn slammed her cane on the floor. The room froze again. Zoe, Grandma said softly. Read the first letter, the one on top. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. I unfolded the letter dated 3 years ago. My darling Zoe, I know you are worried about your future. Please do not be. I have purchased the Lake Rowan house for you. It is yours. You can live there or you can rent it out. The income should be enough to let you follow your dreams without fear. You are free, my dear. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Love, Grandma. I lowered the letter. The words swam before my eyes. You are free. I looked at my father, who was now slumped in his chair, defeated. I looked at my mother, who was weeping silently into her napkin. I looked at Sienna, who was glaring at Derek with pure hatred. They had known. They had known I was supposed to be free, and they had decided to keep me in a cage because they wanted the gold that the cage was made of. You knew, I said to Mark. You knew I was struggling to buy food, and you were cashing my freedom checks. Mark looked up. His eyes were hollow. We needed it, Zoe. The business. We were going to lose the house. This house, your childhood home. So you took mine? I said it was for the family. Elaine wailed. No, I said, standing up. I felt taller than I had ever felt in my life. I picked up the stack of letters. It wasn't for the family because I am family and you ate me alive. I turned to Mr. Meyer. Rower. What happens now? I asked. Ross stepped forward and placed the briefcase on the table right on top of the turkey. Now, he said, clicking the latches open, we begin the audit. And Mr. Foster, I would advise you not to leave the room. Mr. Pike has already notified the local authorities to be on standby. Mark's face went gray. You call the police, he whispered. No, Grandma Evelyn said, buttering a dinner roll with terrifying calm. I called the consequences. I looked across the table at Grandma Evelyn. For the last 20 minutes she had been a force of nature, a hurricane of righteous fury demolishing the facade of our perfect family dinner. But as our eyes met over the centerpiece of wilting autumn flowers, the storm within her seemed to suddenly still. Her breathing evened out. The trembling in her hands ceased. She picked up her wine glass, not to throw it this time, but to take a calm, measured sip of the expensive Chardonnay my father had bought to impress her. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. It was a signal, and just like that, The air in the room shifted to my father, my mother, and my sister. This was a chaotic disaster, unfolding in real time. To them, I was the confused victim, and Grandma was the avenging angel who had stumbled upon a crime. But as I held Grandma's gaze, I let my own mask fall. I stopped hunching my shoulders. I wiped the tears from my cheeks, not with the back of my hand like a frightened child, but with the crisp linen napkin, folding it neatly and placing it beside my plate. I exhaled a long breath, releasing the tension I had been holding for 7 days. "You look confused, Dad," I said. My voice was no longer shaking. It was cool, detached, and dangerously calm. Mark stared at me, his eyes darting between me and his mother. "But," he croaked, "of course I'm confused. This is insanity." "No," I said, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result, like stealing from your family and expecting never to get caught. This is not insanity. This is a sting operation." Sienna scoffed, though it sounded weak. "A sting operation. You watch too much TV. Zoe, you are just enjoying the drama. I am enjoying the justice." I corrected her. "And I am enjoying the fact that you all walked right into it." I turned to Grandma. "I think they are ready for the rest of it. Don't you?" "I believe so," Grandma said softly. I stood up. I didn't feel small anymore. I felt like the person I was supposed to be before they ground me down. "You think this started tonight?" I said, addressing the table. "You think Grandma just showed up and surprised us. But that is not what happened. I didn't drive here tonight hoping for a piece of turkey. I drove here knowing exactly what was going to happen." Elaine's face went slack. "What are you talking about?" "7 days ago," I said, "I got a phone call. It was from Aunt Marlene." The name landed like a bomb. Marlene was Grandma's younger sister, the one person in the extended family my father was terrified of because she had a memory like a steel trap and a tongue like a whip. "Marlene called me," I continued, "because she thought it was strange that I hadn't RSVP to her granddaughter's wedding. She told me she had sent 3 invitations to this address because Dad told her I was living here again. I told her I wasn't. We started talking and then she told me something very interesting. She said, 'It is a shame about Evelyn's dementia, but at least she has you to manage her affairs.'" I looked at my father. He was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. "I told Marlene I had no idea what she was talking about," I said, and Marlene, being Marlene, didn't buy it. "She gave me Grandma's real number, the one you blocked on my phone, and I called her." Grandma nodded. "We met 3 days ago," she said, "at a hotel in Madison. Zoe brought her bank statements. I brought the deed. We sat in that hotel room for 6 hours," I said. "We compared dates. We compared signatures. We looked at the lies you told her about me being unstable, and the lies you told me about her being gone. And we realized that if we just confronted you, you would deny it. You would hide the money. You would gaslight us like you always do." I took a step closer to Mark. "So we wrote a script." I said, "A script?" Mark whispered. The line I said at the beginning of dinner. I have no idea about it." I let the words hang there. Grandma told me that when the moment came when she dropped the hammer about the house, I had to say exactly those words, not to defend myself, but to trigger the trap. I had to look weak so you would feel confident enough to lie. I had to let you dig your own graves. Sienna looked at Grandma, then at me, her eyes widening in horror. "You planned this. You faked it." "I didn't fake the pain, Sienna," I said coldly. "The pain of realizing my sister is a thief, that is real. But the surprise, oh, no. I knew exactly what photo she was going to show. I knew exactly what check she had." "This is entrapment," Mark shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Gavin Pike. "You cannot do this. You cannot just record us or ambush us in my own home." Gavin Pike, the private investigator, finally moved. He had been standing like a statue by the door, but now he walked forward. He didn't look intimidated. He looked bored. "Actually, Mr. Foster," Gavin said, his voice a deep rumble, "in the state of Wisconsin, the law regarding recording conversations is quite specific. It is a one-party consent state. That means as long as one person in the conversation consents to the recording, It is perfectly legal. He tapped the lapel of his jacket. MS. Zoe Foster consented. Gavin said Mrs. Evelyn Foster consented. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a small sleek device. It was a digital recorder, and the little red light on the top was blinking steadily. And Gavin added, pointing to the flower arrangement in the center of the table, "So did the device I planted in the centerpiece when I arrived 10 minutes before dinner, acting as the catering delivery driver." Mark's face drained of all color. He looked at the flowers as if they were venomous snakes. "You have been recording this whole time," Elaine whispered. "Every word," Gavin confirmed. "Every admission, every lie, every attempt to cover up the fraud. When you said you were managing the asset, recorded when Sienna admitted she was the landlord, recorded. When Derek said he forged the signature because Sienna told him to, crystal clear. I didn't say I forged it." Derek yelped, panic rising in his voice. "I said I witnessed it." "Wait, no, I didn't mean." "It does not matter what you meant, Derek," Caleb interrupted from the doorway. "It matters what is on the tape, and what is on the tape is a conspiracy to commit fraud." "This is a game," Mark stammered, standing up and knocking his chair over. "This is just a sick game you are playing to hurt us." "Hurt you?" Rosa Delgado, the forensic accountant, spoke up for the first time. Her voice was sharp and precise, lacking any emotion. "She opened a new file on the table, spreading out a fresh layer of misery for my parents." "Let's talk about hurt, Mr. Foster," Rosa said. "Let's talk about the student loans." I felt a fresh wave of anger wash over me, but I used it. I focused it. "Tell them, Rosa," I said. Rosa looked at Elaine. "Mrs. Foster, for the last 3 years, Zoe has been depositing $600 a month into an account she believed was a trust servicing her student loans. She scraped that money together from waitressing tips. She sacrificed meals. She sacrificed heating." Rosa pointed to a flow chart on the document. "We traced those deposits," Rosa said. "They never went to the Department of Education. They never went to any lender." "Where did they go?" Grandma asked, though she already knew the answer. "They went into an account under the name EF Consulting," Rosa said. "An account controlled solely by Elaine Foster." The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. "You stole my loan payments," I asked my mother. My voice broke just for a second. "You watched me panic about defaulting. You watched me cry because my credit score was tanking, and you were taking the money I gave you to fix it and doing what with it?" Rosa flipped a page. "Spa treatments at the Ridge Club, a lease on a Lexus, and a significant amount spent at an online boutique called Gilded Age." Elaine covered her mouth with her hand. She looked like she was going to be sick. The realization that every transaction had been tracked, every selfish indulgence catalogued, was crushing her. "I was going to pay it back," Elaine whimpered. "It was a loan. I was just borrowing it." "You were stealing from your daughter who was living below the poverty line," I said. "You were drinking wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, bought with money I earned scrubbing floors." "It is not that simple," Sienna yelled. She suddenly lunged across the table, her hand shot out, grabbing for the file Rosa was holding. "Give me that. You cannot just come in here and make up lies." It happened fast. Sienna's fingers brushed the paper, but she never got a grip on it. Gavin Pike moved with a speed that defied his size. In one fluid motion, he intersected Sienna's arm. He didn't hurt her, but he stopped her dead in her tracks. He held her wrist firmly, forcing her to freeze. "I would not do that, Mrs. Miller," Gavin said. His voice was low and dangerous. "Tampering with evidence is another charge you really do not want to add to the list. Sit down." He released her, and Sienna fell back into her chair, gasping for air. She looked around the room, realizing that her tantrums, which had worked on her parents for 30 years, had absolutely no power here. Mark was leaning against the sideboard, looking like a man whose entire reality had dissolved. "Mom," he pleaded, looking at Evelyn. "Please, we can fix this. We can pay it back. Don't ruin us. We are your family." Grandma Evelyn stood up slowly. She looked at her son. She looked at the man she had raised, the man she had trusted. There was no love left in her eyes, only a cold, hard resolve. I did not come back here to eat turkey. Mark, she said, and I did not come back to ruin you. You ruined yourselves the moment you decided your daughter was prey. She walked over to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. Her grip was strong. I came back, Grandma said, her voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel, to tear down the cage you built around Zoe. You thought if you kept her poor, if you kept her doubting herself, she would never look up and see that she was the one holding the keys. Well, she is looking up now. She turned to Mr. Eeyore. Show them the rest. Grandma commanded. Show them exactly what happens when you bite the hand that was trying to feed you. I looked at Mark, Elaine, and Sienna. They were huddled in their chairs, shrinking away from the light of the truth. You called me unstable, I said to them. You were right. I am unstable because the ground beneath your feet is about to collapse, and I am the one pulling the lever. The recorder light blinked red, capturing the sound of their empire crumbling. Calabra did not sit down. He stood at the head of the table, commanding the room, not with volume, but with the terrifying precision of a man who charges $600 an hour to dismantle people's lives. He adjusted his cuffs, opened the leather file on the table, and smoothed out a series of documents with long, pale fingers. The silence in the dining room was absolute, broken only by the wet, ragged breathing of my mother, Elaine. Let us begin with the real estate, Ross said. His voice was dry, devoid of any theatricality. He was not there to perform. He was there to dissect. As established, the property known as Lake Rowan Retreat was purchased 3 years ago by Evelyn Foster, with the deed titling the property to Zoe Foster. He slid a document across the polished wood. It was a copy of the original deed. However, Raw continued, sliding a second document right next to it. 6 months after the initial purchase, a quitclaim deed was filed with the county recorder. This document transferred ownership of the property from Zoe Foster to a limited liability company known as Blue Heron Holdings. I looked at the second paper. It looked official. It had stamps. It had a notary seal. And at the bottom above the line marked Grander was my name, Zoe Foster. I never signed that, I said, my voice cold. We know, Roar said. He nodded to Rosa Delgado. Rosa stepped forward. The forensic accountant adjusted her glasses and pointed to the signature on the quitclaim deed. She then placed a transparency sheet over it. On the transparency were 3 signatures I had provided to Grandma 3 days ago. My real signatures from my driver's license, my lease application, and a check. This is called forensic handwriting analysis. Roser explained, her tone clinical. When we look at a signature, we do not just look at the shape of the letters. We look at the stroke direction, the pen pressure, and the microscopic tremors in the ink flow. She tapped the signature on the deed. The person who signed Zoe Foster here applied heavy pressure on the downstrokes, but lifted the pen slightly at the apex of the capital letters. Zoe, you apply even pressure throughout. Furthermore, the slant of this signature is 12 to the right. Your natural writing slants 4 to the left. Roser pulled another document from her stack. It was a birthday card Sienna had written to Dad 2 years ago. She placed it next to the forgery. However, Roser said, when we compare the forgery to this sample of writing from Sienna Miller, the similarities are striking. The loop on the O in Foster matches the loop on the O in Love perfectly. The angle of attack on the first stroke is identical. The spacing between the letters is a 100% match. Sienna let out a small strangled noise. She looked at her hands, which were clenched in her lap as if they had betrayed her. I practice calligraphy, Sienna whispered, grasping at straws. Maybe our handwriting just looks alike because we are sisters. Handwriting is like a fingerprint. Mrs. Miller, Rosa said dismissively. But if that is not enough, let us look at the notary. Raw took over. The notary's stamp belongs to a Mr. Arthur Finch. We interviewed Mr. Finch yesterday. He is an old acquaintance of your father, Mark Foster, when pressed. Mr. Finch admitted he did not witness Zoe signing the document. He admitted that Mark brought the document to his office already signed and asked for a favor between old friends to backdate the seal. Mark flinched. He looked at Raw with pure hatred, but under the hatred was a deep rotting fear. But here is the part that I find truly fascinating, Ross said. He picked up the quitclaim deed and held it up to the light of the chandelier. This document is dated 2 and 12 years ago. It has been filed ostensibly for years. It looks aged. The paper is slightly yellowed. He dropped the paper back onto the table. Roser, tell them about the yellow dots. Roser tapped a key on her laptop, and she turned the screen so everyone could see. It showed a microscopic close-up of the paper fiber. Scattered across the white space were tiny, almost invisible yellow dots arranged in a grid pattern. Most color laser printers verify their output by printing a microscopic tracking code on every single page. Roser said it is called the machine identification code. It encodes the printer's serial number and the exact time and date the document was printed. She pointed to the decoded data on her screen. This deed, which claims to be from 2 years ago, was printed on a Hewlett-Packard Laser Jet Pro. The timestamp encoded in these dots is last Thursday, specifically at 11:45 at night. The heir left the room. I looked at Mark. I looked at Sienna. You didn't transfer the house years ago. I realized aloud. My voice sounded hollow in my own ears. You didn't have a plan. You just took it. You were just using it. And then I pieced it together. Then Grandma called. I said, Grandma called and said she was coming home, and you panicked. You realized you had no legal paper trail to explain why Sienna was the landlord. So you forged the deed last week. You printed it out, forged my signature, and got Dad's friend to backdate the stamp to make it look like you had been managing it legally all along. It was a correction of paperwork, Mark blurted out. Sweat was now streaming down the sides of his face. We meant to file it years ago. We just forgot. We were just fixing a clerical error. Forging a signature is not a clerical error, Mark. Grandma Evelyn said, it is a crime, and printing it last week proves intent to deceive. It proves you knew exactly what you were doing. But that is just property. Roar interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, becoming even more serious. Property can be returned. Money can be repaid. But reputation, that is harder to fix. He reached into his briefcase again. This time he didn't pull out a legal document. He pulled out a stack of emails. Zoe, Ross said, looking at me. You mentioned earlier that you had trouble finding employment. You mentioned that offers were rescinded. You believed it was bad luck. He slid the emails toward me. I looked at the top one. It was addressed to the HR director of a firm I had interviewed with 2 years ago. A job I had desperately wanted. A job I was perfect for. Subject confidential concern regarding applicant Zoe Foster. Dear hiring team, as a former colleague who wishes to remain anonymous, I feel obligated to warn you about Zoe Foster. While she is talented, she suffers from severe episodes of instability and financial irresponsibility. She has a history of theft and confrontation in the workplace. I would hate to see your company suffer the way ours did. I read the words theft, instability. I felt sick, physically sick. I grabbed the next email. It was sent to a different company. Same tone, different wording. Zoe is a liability. She has legal issues pending. Zoe is currently under investigation for fraud. They were lies, malicious, targeted, venomous lies sent to every single person who had considered hiring me. Who sent these? I whispered. I looked up, tears blurring my vision. Who did this to me? They were sent from an anonymous Gmail account, Gavin Pike said from the corner. calculatedrisk88gmail.com. He stepped forward and placed a technical report on the table, but anonymous email addresses still have digital footprints. Gavin said, we superiored the metadata. Every single one of these emails originated from IP address 192.16. 8.1.1.4. He pointed to the Wi-Fi router blinking in the hallway. That is the IP address of the residential gateway in this house, Gavin said, and the MAC address associated with the device that sent them corresponds to a MacBook Pro. He turned his gaze slowly toward Mark. Your MacBook Pro, Mr. Foster. I stared at my father. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the tablecloth, his jaw working furiously. You sabotaged me, I said. It wasn't a question. I couldn't get a job because you were emailing them, telling them I was crazy. Why? Why would you do that? To keep you me? Grandma Evelyn answered for him. Her voice was full of disgust. "If you got a good job, Zoe, you might move away. You might get a lawyer. You might check your credit report. You might become independent. They needed you poor. They needed you desperate because a desperate person accepts help without asking questions. A desperate person doesn't look for a deed to a lake house. I did it for your own good," Mark shouted, snapping his head up. His eyes were wild. "You were going to leave. You were going to go to New York or Chicago and forget about us. We are a family. Families stay together. Families do not hold each other hostage." I screamed back. "You destroyed my career. You made me think I was worthless. You let me believe I was unhireable. It was just a few emails." Mark yelled. "I was going to hire you at the dealership. Eventually, I was going to take care of you. You were going to make me your servant," I said, shaking, "just like you made me your scapegoat. And the money," Raw cut in, steering the ship back to the hard evidence. "Let us follow the money because that is where the loyalty truly ends." Rosser opened a new spreadsheet. It was a flowchart of funds. Blue Heron Holdings collected $2,500 a month for 36 months. Rosser said that is $90,000 in rental income plus a security deposit plus incidental fees. She traced a line on the chart with her finger. "We expected to see this money going to Sienna," Rosser said. "After all, she was the one playing landlord. She was the one driving up there, dealing with the tenants, forging the signatures." Sienna sat up straighter, looking defiant. "I worked hard for that house," she muttered. "However," Rosa said, "Sienna never received a dime." Sienna froze. "What the bank records for Blue Heron Holdings show an automatic sweep," Rosser explained. "Every time a rent check was deposited, the funds were immediately transferred out within 24 hours. Rosser pointed to the final destination on the chart. "They went to a personal checking account at Chase Bank." Rosser said, "Account ending in 4,429. She looked at Elaine. "That is your personal account, Mrs. Foster, the one you use for your lifestyle expenses." Sienna turned her head slowly to look at her mother. Her expression was one of pure, unadulterated shock. "Mom," Sienna asked. Her voice was high and thin. "You took the money?" Elaine looked trapped. She tried to smile, but it looked like a grimace. "Well, Sienna, you know, running this house is expensive, and your father's business has been slow. I needed to keep things afloat. You told me that money was going into a trust." Sienna screamed. "You told me we were saving it. You told me I was helping the family. You were helping." Elaine cried. "You were helping me. I took all the risk." Sienna stood up, her chair crashing backward onto the floor. She was hysterical now. "I signed the papers. I forged Zoe's name. I drove up there every weekend to unclog toilets and deal with the Hendersons. I could go to jail for this, and you spent it on shoes." "It wasn't just shoes." Elaine defended herself weakly. "I bought groceries. I paid the gardener. I committed a felony for you." Sienna shrieked. She pointed a trembling finger at Mark. "And you told me it was legal. You told me Zoe knew. You told me Zoe signed the power of attorney and just forgot because she was crazy. You lied to me." "I didn't lie," Mark stammered. "I just simplified the truth." "You made me a criminal," Sienna yelled. She turned to Gavin Pike. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know they were stealing it all. Dad told me to sign. He brought me the papers and said, 'Sign Zoe's name.' She gave permission. She's just too busy to come in. He told me to do it." "Sienna, shut up," Mark roared. "No, I won't shut up." Sienna turned to me, her eyes wide and desperate. "Zoe, listen to me. I didn't get the money. Look at the chart. Mom took it. Dad set it up. I was just doing what they told me. I am a victim, too. A victim." I looked at her. "You mocked my pie. Sienna, you told me I was a failure while you were pretending to own my house. You are not a victim. You are an accomplice who just realized she didn't get paid enough. But Dad made me." Sienna sobbed, pointing at Mark again. "He is the one who printed the deed last week. He is the one who told me to practice your signature. He said if I didn't do it, the family would lose everything." Mark stared at his daughter. The look on his face was not love. It was the look of a man watching his escape route burn down. "You ungrateful little brat." Mark hissed at Sienna. I bought you that convertible. I paid for your wedding. And this is how you repay me. By squealing the second things get hot. You set me up, Sienna screamed. We have enough, Ross said calmly, closing his file. The sharp snap of the leather cover sounded like the final nail in a coffin. He looked at the three of them, Mark sweaty and cornered, Elaine weeping over her exposed greed, and Sienna shivering in the wreckage of her betrayal. A circular firing squad has formed, Roar observed to Grandma Evelyn. They are confessing to everything in an attempt to blame each other. It is fascinating, isn't it? Grandma said she hadn't moved. She was just watching them. A look of profound disappointment etched onto her face. You put pressure on a diamond and it gets stronger. You put pressure on this family and it turns into dust. She looked at me. Are you seeing this, Zoe? She asked. I see it, I said. And I did. I saw them for exactly what they were. Not powerful, not successful, not superior, just small, greedy people who were ready to eat each other to save their own skins. Good, Grandma said, because now that we have established the facts, it is time to discuss the bill. The dining room felt less like a place for a holiday meal and more like the cockpit of a plane spiraling toward the ground. The air was thick with the smell of cooling gravy and the metallic tang of adrenaline. My father Mark was the first to try and pull up from the nosedive. He pushed himself away from the sideboard, his face slick with a sheen of cold sweat, and attempted to reconstruct the shattered remains of his authority. You are twisting everything, Mark said, his voice straining to find a reasonable pitch, but failing miserably. He looked at Mr. Raw, then at Gavin Pike, and finally rested his gaze on Grandma Evelyn, pleading with her to see his version of reality. We did this for the family. Mom, you have to understand that we are a unit. We pull resources. Zoe simply does not know how to manage assets. She never has. If we had given her that house 3 years ago, she would have lost it. She would have been swindled. We were protecting the legacy. It was the same tired song he had been singing for a decade. But this time, the melody was off-key. Grandma Evelyn did not shout. She didn't even raise her voice. She simply leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, and asked a single question that cut through his defense like a scalpel through necrotic tissue. If you were protecting the family legacy, Mark, she said, her blue eyes icy, then tell me this. Why is Zoe living on an air mattress in a friend's living room, unable to afford a winter coat, while Sienna is living like an influencer in a gated community? Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish hauled onto a dock, gasping for air that wasn't there. Explain the economics of your protection, Grandma pressed. Why does one granddaughter have a closet full of designer handbags paid for by my trust, while the other granddaughter, the one who actually owns the property, is bringing a 99-cent pie to dinner because she cannot afford better? The silence that followed was excruciating. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with the undeniable weight of their greed. My mother, Elaine, broke first. The pressure was too much for her carefully curated facade. She lunged forward, reaching for Grandma's hand, her bracelets clinking frantically against the fine china. Mother, please, Eller begged, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. We can fix this. We can pay it back. I will sell the car. I will sell my jewelry. Just tell these men to leave. Don't let them take us away. We are your flesh and blood. Then, in a movement so jarring it made me physically recoil, she snapped her head toward me. The tears were still on her cheeks, but her eyes were dry and hard as flint. The switch from pleading daughter-in-law to commanding mother was instantaneous. Zoe, she ordered, her voice losing all its wobble. Tell Grandma you are okay with this. Tell her we talked about it. Tell her you gave us permission to manage the funds, and you just forgot. Fix this, Zoe. Do it for me. I stared at her. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. For my entire life, I had made excuses for them. I told myself they were strict because they wanted me to succeed. I told myself they were critical because they cared. Even tonight, amidst the revelations of theft and fraud, a small, stupid part of me had held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, they had misguidedly thought they were helping. But looking at Elaine now, I saw the truth. It was naked and ugly. She didn't see me. She didn't see her daughter. She saw a signature. She saw a shield. She saw a scapegoat. To her, I wasn't a person with feelings or needs. I was a resource to be minded, and a barrier to be used when the consequences came knocking. I was nothing more than a name on a piece of paper that unlocked a bank account. "You want me to lie," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "so you don't have to face what you did." "I am your mother," Elaine hissed, the desperation making her vicious. "I gave you life. You owe me this. Just say you knew." "It is one sentence, Zoe. Say it." "She can't say it." Sienna screamed from across the table. We all turned to Sienna. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving, her hands gripping her hair. She looked like a cornered animal that had realized the trap was biting into the bone. "She can't say it because it doesn't make sense," Sienna yelled, her eyes darting wildly between her parents. "You guys told me we had to keep it a secret. You said it was the only way." "Sienna, be quiet," Mark warned, his voice a low growl. "No," Sienna shrieked, standing up and knocking her chair back again. She pointed a trembling finger at Elaine. "You told me you said we have to keep Zoe poor. I asked why we couldn't just give her a little bit of the rent money just so she wouldn't ask questions, and you said no." "I never said that," Elaine shouted, her face turning purple. "You did," Sienna cried, tears flying. "You said if Zoe gets money, she will get independent. She will move away. She will stop needing us. And if she stops needing us, we can't control her. You said we had to keep her desperate so she would stay under your thumb. You said poverty was the only leash that worked on her." The words hung in the air, vibrating with a terrible radioactive half-life. Poverty was the only leash that worked on her. I felt a cold mist spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was the chill of absolute betrayal. They hadn't just stolen my money to buy things. They had stolen my money to break my spirit. They had engineered my struggle. Every rejected credit card, every declined application, every night I went to bed hungry. It wasn't bad luck. It was a strategy. It was a containment protocol. "You monster," I whispered to my mother. Elaine recoiled as if I had slapped her. But then, true to form, she lashed out. "You shut up!" Eller screamed at Sienna. "You ungrateful little brat. You're trying to pin this on me, who drove the new Mercedes to the lake house, who posted the photos, who played the big shot landlady. You enjoyed every second of it. Sienna, you loved spending that money just as much as I did. Do not pretend you are innocent." "I did what I was told," Sienna wailed. "Dad said it was business." "And you are an idiot for believing him," Elaine yelled back. "Stop it," Derek shouted. It was the first time Derek had spoken with any force all night. He stood up, looking pale and nauseous. He looked from his wife to his in-laws, and the horror on his face was genuine. Derek was a man who liked shortcuts. Sure, he liked easy money, but he was watching a family cannibalize itself, and he realized he was on the menu. "I didn't sign up for this," Derek stammered, backing away from the table. "See, you told me the house was a gift. You said your parents gave it to us to manage because Zoe didn't want it. You said it was a family perk." "It was," Sienna sobbed. "No," Derek said, shaking his head violently. "This isn't a perk. This is a felony ring. I am a licensed realtor. Sienna, do you know what happens to me if this gets out? I lose my license. I go to jail. I thought we were bending the rules, not kidnapping your sister's life." "Oh, stop being dramatic, Derek," Mark snapped. "You spent the money, too. You liked the boat. You liked the club membership. I thought the money was ours." Derek yelled. "I didn't know it was stolen from the girl sitting across the table eating a 99-cent pie. There is a line, Mark, and you guys aren't just crossing it. You are erasing it." Derek looked at me. "Zoe, I swear to God, I didn't know the extent of it. I am sorry. I am so sorry." "Sit down, Derek," Mark commanded. "You are part of this family, and you will stand with us." "I am not standing anywhere near you," Derek spat. He moved toward the door, but Gavin Pike stepped sideways, blocking his path with the immovability of a boulder. "Not yet, Mr. Miller," Gavin said calmly. "We are not done." Gavin walked back to the table. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out one final document. It wasn't a bank statement. It wasn't a deed. It was a single sheet of paper folded in thirds. He placed it gently in front of Grandma Evelyn. "We found this in the safe in Mr. Foster's home office." Gavin said, "We executed a search based on probable cause regarding the mail fraud." Grandma Evelyn put on her reading glasses. Her hands were steady, but as she read the document, her jaw tightened until I thought her teeth might crack. "Explain this, Mark," she said softly. Mark looked at the paper. For the first time tonight, the arrogance completely vanished from his face. It was replaced by a terror so profound it looked like he was staring into his own grave. He didn't speak. He couldn't. "What is it?" I asked. Grandma picked up the paper and held it up. "It is a durable power of attorney," Grandma said. "Dated 6 months ago." She looked at the signature line. "It grants Mark Foster full control over all of my assets, my medical decisions, and my estate. It declares that I, Evelyn Foster, am mentally incompetent and unable to manage my own affairs due to advanced dementia." She lowered the paper and looked at her son with eyes that were no longer the eyes of a mother, but the eyes of a stranger. "I never signed this," she said. "I have never been diagnosed with dementia. My doctor in Florida will testify to that, and this signature." She pointed to the scroll at the bottom. "That is not even a good forgery. It is shaky. It looks like someone trying to imitate an old woman's hand." Gavin Pike spoke up, his voice dry and factual. "We checked the notary stamp on this one, too. It is from a different office, a small check cashing place on the edge of town. The notary there admitted he was paid $500 cash to stamp a document without the signer present." The implication hit the room like a physical shockwave. Stealing the lake house was greed. Stealing the rent was theft. But this was something much darker. "You were going to have me committed," Grandma said. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with a terrible, consuming rage. "You were going to use this fate document to declare me incompetent. You were going to lock me away in a nursing home so you could liquidate my entire estate before I even died." Mark said nothing. He stared at the table. "Answer me," Grandma screamed, slamming her hand down. "You were planning to bury me alive to get my money." "We needed liquidity," Mark whispered. The excuse was so pathetic, so monstrous that it sucked the oxygen out of the room. "Liquidity," I repeated, feeling like I was going to vomit. "You were going to put Grandma in a home. You were going to take her life away just like you took mine." "She is old," Elaine blurted out, her survival instinct misfiring wildly. "She doesn't need all that money. We have debts. We have the mortgage. It was going to come to us eventually anyway. We were just accelerating the process." "Accelerating the process," Grandma repeated. She looked at Elaine with pure revulsion. "You were waiting for me to die, and when I didn't die fast enough, you decided to help me along." Sienna looked at her parents with wide, horrified eyes. Even she, with all her selfishness, hadn't known this. "You were going to put Grandma away," Sienna whispered. "You told me she was sick. You told me she needed care, but you were going to lock her up. We did it for the family." Mark roared, slamming his fists on the table. He stood up, knocking his chair over, looking wild and unhinged. "For you, Sienna, for the house, for the cars. Do you think this life still pays for itself? Do you think I could keep this up on a dealership salary? I did what I had to do." He breathed heavily, his chest heaving, waiting for someone to agree with him, waiting for someone to validate his monstrous logic. But there was only silence. The lawyer, Caleb, looked at him with professional disinterest. The forensic accountant typed a note. The private investigator stood by the door. I sat still, gripping my fork. And in that silence, Mark Foster realized that he hadn't just lost the money. He hadn't just lost the house. He had lost the narrative. He was no longer the provider. He was a predator, and he had just confessed to the hunt in a room full of witnesses. Caleb did not look at the devastated faces around the table. He was busy arranging the documents back into his briefcase with the meticulous rhythmic precision of a mortician closing a casket. The click of the brass latches sounded like gunshots in the sudden suffocating silence that had followed Mark's accidental confession. "You seem to be under a misapprehension, Mr. Foster," Ross said, his voice level and devoid of any theatrical inflection. "You seem to believe that this dinner was an investigation. You believe that if you argue hard enough or come up with a sympathetic enough excuse, we might close these files and go home." He looked up then, and his gray eyes were as hard as slate. This was not an investigation. The investigation concluded 72 hours ago. We did not come here tonight to find out if you committed fraud. We came here to give you one final chance to go on the record before the official machinery takes over. And you have done exactly that. What do you mean? Mark asked. His voice was a dry rattle. He was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white, looking like a captain realizing his ship had already sunk 10 minutes ago. I mean, Ross said, checking his watch, that before we stepped into this house, my office electronically filed a formal complaint with the district attorney's office regarding the identity theft, the wire fraud, and the elder abuse. We also submitted a preliminary evidence packet to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division regarding the interstate nature of the mail fraud. The color drained from Mark's face so completely that he looked like a wax figure. You went to the FBI. You stole federal mail, Mark, Grandma Evelyn said from her seat. She was cutting a piece of turkey, her hand steady, her appetite apparently unaffected by the destruction of her son's life. You used the United States Postal Service to facilitate a felony. That is not a local matter. That is federal. No, Mark whispered. Then panic seized him. It was primal and ugly. He scrambled backward, his chair screeching against the hardwood floor. No, I am not staying for this. I am calling my lawyer. You cannot keep me here. He lunged toward the hallway, aiming for the front door, desperate to put distance between himself and the consequences sitting at his dining table. He made it 2 steps. Gavin Pike did not run. He simply shifted his weight. He stepped into the archway, blocking the exit with the casual immovability of a concrete wall. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't pull a weapon. He just stood there broad and silent, looking down at my father with a mixture of pity and boredom. Mr. Foster, Gavin rumbled, I would strongly advise you to sit down. Flight risk is a factor that determines bail amounts. Don't make it worse. Mark stopped. He looked at Gavin, then back at the table, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped bird. This is kidnapping. You are holding me hostage. We are preserving the scene, Gavin corrected him. Sit down. Mark slumped. The fight went out of him as quickly as it had appeared. He dragged his feet back to the table and collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. This cannot be happening, Elaine sobbed. She was rocking back and forth, clutching her napkin to her chest. We are good people. We go to church. We donate to the food drive. We are the Fosters. You are thieves, Grandma Evelyn said. She reached into her tote bag one last time. The sound of the heavy paper sliding out was the only noise in the room. Since we are discussing the family legacy, Grandma said, placing a document on the table, I thought you should see the updates I made to my last will and testament this morning. Elaine looked up, her tear-streaked face suddenly sharp with interest, even in the depths of her terror. The mention of the will triggered her greed reflex. I have instructed Mr. Raw to draft a new cortisol, Grandma said. She put on her reading glasses and looked down at the paper. Effective immediately, Mark Foster, Elaine Foster, and Sienna Miller are disinherited. A gasp went around the table. Disinherited, Sienna squeaked. But Grandma, I am your granddaughter. I didn't mean to do it. They made me. You are an adult. Sienna, Grandma said without looking up. You had a choice. You chose the money. She continued reading. I have also included a specific clause regarding the spouses. Derek Miller is excluded from any potential beneficiary claims. Furthermore, in the event of my death, the entirety of my estate, including the Lake Rowan property, my investment portfolio, and the liquid assets currently held in the trust, will pass to the sole beneficiary. She looked at me. Zoe Foster. Elaine let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. Mother, you cannot do that. That is millions of dollars. You are giving it all to her. She pointed at me with a trembling hand, as if I were a stranger who had broken in. She doesn't know how to handle money. She is a child. She works temp jobs. She works temp jobs because you stole her career. Grandma snapped. But family, Eller cried, throwing herself across the table to grab Grandma's hand again. We are your family. You raised Mark. You held Sienna when she was a baby. You cannot just cut us off. We made mistakes. Yes, but we love you. Please, Mother, don't let strangers take us away. Don't let us lose everything. We can work this out. We will pay you back every cent. I swear. Just give us time." Grandma looked at Elaine's hand on her arm. She didn't pull away this time. She just looked at it with profound sadness. "You want forgiveness, Elaine?" Grandma asked softly. "Yes." Ella nodded frantically. "Yes, please, for the sake of the family." "Then do not ask me," Grandma said. She turned her head and looked directly at me. "Apologize to Zoe." Elaine froze. The room went silent. Grandma pointed a finger at me. "You didn't just steal from me, Elaine. I am old. I have lived my life. You stole the beginning of hers. You stole her security. You stole her confidence. You let her think she was broken so you could buy a Lexus. If you want mercy, you ask her." Elaine turned slowly to face me. I looked at my mother. I waited. I waited to see a flicker of maternal instinct. I waited to see regret for the pain she had caused me, not just the trouble she was in. But I saw nothing. Her eyes were blank. She looked at me and she didn't see a daughter. She saw an obstacle. She saw the person who was standing between her and the lifestyle she felt she deserved. "Zoe," Elaine said, her voice tight and forced. Tell her to stop this. We are your parents. You cannot let them send us to jail. Think about what people will say." That was it. Think about what people will say. Even now, facing federal charges. Her biggest fear was the neighborhood gossip. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It was the breaking of a chain, the last link of guilt, the one that had tethered me to them for 34 years. Finally snapped. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I just looked at her, and I asked the question that had been burning a hole in my stomach for 3 years. "Do you know what brand of instant noodles costs 35 cents?" I asked softly. Elaine blinked, confused by the non sequitur. "Art, 35, I repeated. "That is the price of the generic beef flavor at the discount store on 4th Street. Do you know how many months I ate that for dinner every single night?" "Zoe, stop it." Mark groaned. "This isn't the time for your pity party." "8 months," I said, ignoring him. 8 months. Dad, I ate sodium and water for 8 months because I was trying to save enough money to pay the interest on the loans you were stealing. I lost 12 pounds. My hair started falling out. I fainted at work once. I looked at Sienna, and while I was fainting, I said, my voice trembling slightly, "You were posting photos of lobster dinners at the lake." "My lake." "I didn't know you were hungry," Sienna cried defensively. "You never said anything." "I did." I slammed my hand on the table, the sudden noise making them all jump. "I told you I was struggling. I told you I couldn't make rent. And you told me I was unstable. You told me to work harder. You watched me starve, Sienna, and you laughed about it while you drank champagne on my deck." "It wasn't like that," Sienna shouted, panic making her reckless. "We didn't faint. It was a big deal. Dad said it was fine. Dad said as long as you didn't come back to the house, no one would check the paperwork. He said you were too scared of him to investigate." The air in the room seemed to crystallize. Sienna slapped a hand over her mouth, but the words were already out. They hung in the air, glowing with the toxicity of truth. "Dad said as long as you didn't come back, no one would check." It was the final nail. It proved premeditation. It proved that my exile wasn't an accident. It was a requirement for their scheme. Mark closed his eyes. He knew it was over. Calabraw cleared his throat. He opened a new folder, one with a red tab. "Thank you for that clarification, Mrs. Miller," Ross said. "That goes a long way toward establishing the conspiracy charge. Now, let us discuss restitution." He slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward Mark. It contained a list of numbers. "We have calculated the damages," Ross said. $90,000 in stolen rental income, $15,000 in misappropriated student loan payments, $40,000 in legal fees for the recovery of the deed, and then there are the punitive damages. He pointed to a larger number at the bottom. "We are seeking compensation for defamation of character regarding the emails sent to employers, loss of potential income for 3 years of unemployment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." The total demand for restitution is $750,000. Mark stared at the paper, his eyes bulged. $750,000? Mark shrieked. Are you insane? We don't have that kind of money. We don't have anything close to that. We know, Rosa Delgado said calmly. We have analyzed your accounts. You are over-leveraged. You have 3 mortgages on this house. The dealership is operating at a loss. You are, for all intents and purposes, insolvent. Then you can't get blood from a stone, Mark yelled, finding a desperate sort of courage in his bankruptcy. Sue us all you want. We have nothing. You get nothing. He looked at me with a sneer. So, congratulations, Zoe. You won a piece of paper. You can't collect a dime. I looked at my father. I looked at the gold watch on his wrist. I looked at the crystal chandelier above his head. I looked at the silk curtains. You are wrong, I said. I stood up and walked over to the window. I looked out at the driveway, where Sienna's convertible sat, gleaming under the street lights. You don't have cash, I said, turning back to face them. But you have things. You have this house. You have the cars. You have Mom's jewelry. You have the furniture. This is our own. Elaine screamed. You can't take our home. It is not your home, I said, my voice cold. It is the collateral you used to finance your fraud. And now it is my restitution. You would put us on the street. Mark asked, his voice shaking. Your own parents. You would make us homeless. You made me homeless, I said. You let me sleep on a deflated air mattress for a year, while you slept on Egyptian cotton sheets bought with my money. I'm not putting you on the street, Dad. I am just balancing the books. You are a witch, Sienna spat. No, I said. I am the landlord, and your lease is up. Suddenly, a low buzzing sound filled the room. We all looked at Gavin Pike. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He looked at the screen, then looked up at Roar. They are here, Gavin said. The 3 words sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room. Mark froze. Elaine stopped crying. Sienna looked at the door. Who is here? Derek whispered, his face the color of ash. The outcome, Grandma Evelyn said, outside through the heavy curtains. Blue and red lights began to flash. They swept across the dining room walls, rhythmic and terrifying. Blue, red, blue, red. They illuminated the terrified faces of my family, washing out the warmth of the Thanksgiving candles, replacing the holiday glow with the harsh strobe light, reality of the law. The silence that fell over the table was heavy. It was the silence of a cliff edge. It was the silence of people who had spent their whole lives thinking they were above the rules, suddenly realizing that gravity applied to them too. Mark stood up, but his legs gave way and he sat back down heavily. He looked at his hands. He looked at the scotch he hadn't finished. He looked at the life that was ending right in front of him. Zoe, Mark whispered. It wasn't a command this time. It wasn't a manipulation. It was a plea from a man who saw the end. Please, I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike and then taught me that I was worthless so he could steal my inheritance. I have no idea about it, I said softly, repeating the password one last time. But this time it meant something different. It meant I had no idea how to save them, and for the first time in my life, I had no desire to try. A heavy, authoritative knock echoed from the front door. Then. The sound reverberated through the house, shaking the crystal, shaking the walls, shaking the lie they had lived in for so long. I will get that, Gavin said. He turned and walked toward the hallway. The double doors of the dining room stood open, framing the path to the front entrance. We all sat there frozen as the sound of the deadbolt turning echoed through the house like a gunshot. The sound of the door opening was not dramatic. It was terrifyingly mundane. There was no kicking down of wood, no shouting of commands, just the heavy rhythmic thud of boots on the hardwood floor and the click of the latch engaging as the front door was pushed wide open. The draft from the outside rushed into the hallway, carrying the scent of dead leaves and impending snow, sweeping away the warm, stale air of the dining room. Gavin Pike stepped back, allowing the new arrivals to enter. 2 uniformed officers and 2 detectives in plain clothes walked into the light of the chandelier. They did not look like guests. They did not look like neighbors. They looked like the inevitable result of a mathematical equation that my family had been trying to solve incorrectly for 3 years. They brought with them an atmosphere of absolute clinical seriousness that made the expensive furniture and the silver cutlery look ridiculous and fragile. The lead detective, a woman with tired eyes and a badge clipped to her belt, scanned the room. She held a clipboard. She didn't look at the turkey. She didn't look at the wine. She looked at the faces. "We are looking for Sienna Miller," she said. Her voice was flat, professional, and loud enough to reach the corners of the room. Sienna let out a small, strangled squeak. She tried to shrink into her chair, to make herself small, to become a little girl who could cry her way out of trouble. But she was not a little girl. She was a 36-year-old woman who had forged a deed and impersonated a landlord. "I am Sienna," she whispered. "Sienna Miller," the detective said, walking around the table to stand behind my sister's chair. "We have a warrant for your arrest regarding charges of identity theft, forgery of illegal instrument, and grand larceny." Sienna looked at Derek. Her husband was staring at the wall, refusing to make eye contact. She looked at Mark. Her father was staring at his hands. She looked at Elaine. Her mother was weeping silently. "Stand up, please," the detective said. "Begag." Sienna stood up. Her legs were shaking so badly she had to hold on to the table. When the detective pulled her hands behind her back, and the metallic click, click of the handcuffs echoed through the room, the reality finally shattered her denial. "Zoe!" Sienna screamed. It was a roar, piercing sound. She twisted her body, trying to look at me. "Zoe, please tell them. Tell them it was a mistake. I am your sister. You cannot let them take me. I will go to jail. Zoe, please just tell them you knew." I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had mocked my poverty. I looked at the woman who had lived in my house, slept under my roof, and spent my money while I shivered in a drafty room. I felt a phantom ache in my stomach. The memory of hunger, and it hardened my heart into stone. "Zoe," she begged, tears streaming down her face, ruining the makeup she had bought with my student loan money. "Do you have any idea what they will do to me? Do you have any idea?" I took a sip of my water. I set the glass down. I met her gaze and I felt absolutely nothing. "I have no idea about it," I said softly. The room seemed to freeze around those words. And I added, looking at the handcuffs on her wrists, "I no longer have the obligation to know." Sienna's face crumpled. She realized finally that the password she had mocked was actually a verdict. The detective gently but firmly steered Sienna toward the hallway. "Mark Foster," another officer said, stepping toward the head of the table. My father looked up. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. The arrogance that had fueled him for decades, the belief that he was the smartest man in the room, had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, aging man in a suit he could no longer afford. Mark started, his voice cracking. "I need to call my attorney." "You can do that from the station, sir," the officer said. "Stand up." Mark stood up. He looked at the table at the feast he had presided over like a king. He looked at Calabraw, who was watching him with cold indifference. "I was trying to save the house." Mark whispered more to himself than anyone else. "I was just trying to save the house." "You didn't save it," Gavin Pike said from the doorway. "You just lost the people who lived in it." The handcuffs went on Mark. He flinched at the touch of the cold metal. Elaine was last. She wasn't arrested. Not yet. But she was detained for questioning. An officer stood by her chair, waiting. She looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading, waiting for me to intervene, waiting for me to fall back into the role of the beautiful, obedient daughter. "Zoe," she sobbed, "we are family. You cannot let them do this. Family sticks together." Grandma Evelyn stood up. She walked over to where I was sitting. She didn't look at her son being led away. She didn't look at her granddaughter crying in the hallway. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was a ring of keys. Attached to the ring was a wooden keychain carved in the shape of a lawn. She placed the keys in my hand. They were cold and hard and real. Then she placed a thick envelope on top of them. "The address is inside," Grandma said softly. "It is 3 hours north. The heater works. The fridge is full, and the deed is in the envelope. The real deed, the one that no one can take away from you." I closed my fingers around the keys. The metal bit into my palm, a sensation that felt like an anchor grounding me to the earth. "Thank you," I whispered. Elaine was being let out now. As she passed the dining room threshold, she turned back one last time, her face twisted in a mask of desperation and fury. "How can you do this?" Elaine screamed at Grandma. "We are your family. Family protects each other." Grandma Evelyn looked at her daughter-in-law. She looked at the woman who had intercepted her letters, who had tried to have her declared incompetent, who had starved her granddaughter. "Family," Grandma said, her voice clear and cutting as a bell in winter, "does not eat each other." Eller's mouth snapped shut. She turned away, defeated by the truth, and walked out into the night, flanked by the consequences she had earned. Derek was the only one left standing. He was pressed against the wall, looking like he wanted to merge with the wallpaper. He looked at the empty chairs. He looked at the plate of half-eaten turkey where his wife had been sitting. Derek stammered. He looked at me. "I am going to pack my things. I am going to leave." "Leave the car," Caleb Ross said without looking up from his notes. "The convertible is listed as an asset of Blue Heron Holdings. It is not yours to take." Derek nodded, swallowed hard, and walked out of the room. He didn't look back. The front door closed. The flashing blue and red lights that had been dancing across the walls stopped, leaving the room in a sudden ringing stillness. The engine noises faded down the street. It was just us now. Me, Grandma Evelyn, Caleb Raw, Gavin Pike, Roser Delgado, and the silent, cooling Thanksgiving dinner. I looked at the table. The candles were still burning, their flames flickering in the draught that lingered in the room. The turkey sat there, a monument to a celebration that never happened. My pumpkin pie, the one in the foil tin, sat untouched near the edge of the table. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't hungry. "Mr. Raw," Grandma said, breaking the silence, "please ensure the restraining orders are served by morning." "It is already in motion, Mrs. Foster," Raw said, snapping his briefcase shut. He walked over to me and placed a crisp folder on the table. "This contains the contact information for the property manager at Lake Rowan, the real one, and a check from your grandmother's personal account to cover your immediate expenses until the restitution process begins." I didn't open the folder. I didn't need to check the amount. For the first time in my life, I wasn't counting pennies in my head. "Zoe," Grandma said. I stood up. My legs felt steady. The shaking that had plagued me for hours, for years, was gone. I felt light. I felt like someone had cut the heavy ropes that had been dragging behind me. "Are you okay?" she asked. I looked around the room. I looked at the chair where my father had sat and lied to me. I looked at the spot where my mother had tried to guilt me. I looked at the empty space where my sister had laughed at me. "I am not happy," I said honestly, "but I am finished." "That is a good place to start," Grandma said. She smiled, and this time the smile reached her eyes. "Go. The drive is long and the snow is coming." I picked up the keys. I picked up the folder. I left the pie. I walked out of the dining room, down the hallway that used to intimidate me, and opened the front door. The cold air hit my face, sharp and biting, but it felt clean. It didn't smell like sage and deception. It smelled like winter. It smelled like Wisconsin. I walked down the path to my beat-up Honda Civic. I didn't look back at the big colonial house with the white pillars. I didn't look at the driveway where the luxury car sat, seized by the law. I unlocked my car door and sat in the driver's seat. I put the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. I looked at the passenger seat. There was no pie there, just a set of keys with a wooden loon and an envelope with an address. Lake Rowan Retreat. I put the car in gear. I didn't know what I would do when I got there. I didn't know if I would sell it or live in it. I didn't know what job I would get next. But as I pulled away from the curb and drove into the dark, quiet night, I knew one thing for certain. The climax of this story wasn't the screaming. It wasn't the arrests. It wasn't the look on my father's face. The climax was right now. It was the feeling of driving down a road, holding a key in my hand, and knowing that for the first time in my life, the truth finally had an address and I was going home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So, please drop a comment below with your location and let's share our thoughts on Zoe's journey. Don't forget to subscribe to the Azad Revenge Stories channel. like this video, and hit the like button to help this story reach even more people. Thanks for watching.